Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here, Kerry. Very excited about this. So, just a little background on myself before I get into the details. In 2010, of November, I got contracted by Raytheon Polar Services to go down to Antarctica, South Pole Station specifically, 90 degrees south of the bottom of the planet. I spent an entire year there until November of 2011. And I learned quite a bit, absorbing information when I was there, and then I did a lot of calculating and research afterwards to basically figure out what I had actually experienced. And it was a lot. So what I'm going to do here is start with basically a background and overview of what it's like in Antarctica and how the program presents itself to the world publicly. And then at the tail end, I'm going to give you what I learned about what is really going on and what I went to Washington, D.C. last year in June of 2023. I testified in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee and a faction known as Arrow to fill them in on what I'm going to fill you folks in on today, because it's a lot crazier than what we're being told. So for starters, you can see here a relative proportion of the continent of Antarctica compared to the United States of America. It is the highest, driest, coldest, and windiest continent on the planet. The average elevation of 8,200 feet, and the highest point being Vincent Massif at 16,362 feet. It says here that it's close to no humidity, but at South Pole Station, it is actually 0% humidity and 9,300 feet of actual elevation. We call it the harsh continent. The Antarctic Treaty was signed by 12 nations, becoming effective in 1961, and currently has been signed by over 48 countries. The treaty stipulates that the continent can only be used for science, not for mining or military purposes. Over 40 countries have stations operating during summer, and about 30 of those stations operate year-round. During the austral summer, approximately 4,000 researchers and support staff occupy Antarctica. During the austral winter, that population drops down to about 1,000 for the entirety of the continent. Here you see a map indicating a lot of the service stations and how it's kind of mapped off for, you know, I wouldn't say ownership, but just kind of areas of control, who's running certain sections. This is a wonderful view of the world because no one ever really sees this. You can see on the bottom of the continent, you see McMurdo Station, and on the really far bottom, you can see New Zealand. New Zealand is pretty much the base of operations for what's called the United States Antarctic Program, and most of the logistics goes from Christchurch, New Zealand, into McMurdo Station, and then over to South Pole Station. If you look to the left side of the continent, you can see Palmer Station. Those are basically the three U.S. facilities, with McMurdo being pretty much the largest facility on the entire continent. Here you can actually see that was my crew flying in the back of a C-17. Actually, that image, the top one's a Herc, but the bottom one's the C-17. The Ross Ice Shelf and the frozen sea ice provides a flat runway early in the season, and tests are done regularly to check the thickness of the ice. The ice runway and support buildings are deconstructed and moved when the sea ice becomes too thin or too soft. So what you're looking at right there is a C-17, and it's on sea ice. Underneath that is ocean. So it's very well groomed and attended to make sure that, you know, they could bring that cargo in. There's that beautiful C-17. I'm very fond of C-17s and Hercs now. That's a shot from the runway. And that's McMurdo Station. McMurdo's like a small town. So many jobs exist in McMurdo requiring lots of personnel. Summer population is 800 to 900, and the winter population is 1 to 150. This is Scott Base, New Zealand's research station, located on the same island with McMurdo. The U.S. and New Zealand stations often collaborate on science, cargo, and logistics. In reality, they're almost indistinguishable from each other in how they function in the area. Just almost like same stuff going on, but the Kiwis just have their own sleeping quarters. icebreakers churning up some raw sea ice so that the resupply ship can get into McMurdo. They basically just have one massive resupply ship come in annually, so logistics is extremely important there, planning and scheming. Here's some of the variety of vehicles that they have. On the right-hand side, you'll see a vehicle that had toppled over. They got caught in whiteout conditions and were stuck for quite some time, and rescue was a very big deal. It's a very challenging continent. Things are great when they're going fine, but the split second something goes wrong, things can get ugly. Here's some of the miscellaneous buildings from McMurdo Station. They basically have everything in McMurdo: fire department, hospital, you know, all kinds of military-style housing. The Navy used to run the program out in Antarctica. It was called Operation Deep Freeze. They still have logistical support, but they operate under that title, but they're no longer necessarily in charge. Everything operates now under the National Science Foundation and the third-party contractors. Just some miscellaneous pictures from around McMurdo. They do have a wind farm now. They're trying to do their best because fuel is very expensive to bring out there. And the waste stream. It's a lot of work to keep the continent clean. Here's some images of just some basic jobs. There's from dishwashers to down on the bottom we have what's called Mac Ops, the voice of Antarctica. There's a lot of flight following because there's a lot of activity outside the 3 U.S. facilities. There's all kinds of activity going on we call it on the ice, all over the place. So they need to make sure they can keep in contact with folks. This is a standard berthing compartment, very austere conditions, and it's very noisy. It's very hard to get sleep there. The sun going up and down once in 365 days. You break your circadian rhythm by just having to deal with, you know, sun 24 hours a day in the summer season. Mount Erebus on the bottom right. That bird there is called a skua. They're very large and aggressive seagulls, basically. None of the wildlife in Antarctica has ever really acclimated to human activity, and the skua are known for being scavengers. They'll come at you if they think you have food. They're not afraid. They do have recreational stuff to, you know, keep the employees happy. This is what they call Happy Camper School. So they'll take a lot of the personnel that are participating in the program and bring them out into the environment for 24 to 48 hours to teach them how to survive in the harsh weathers of Antarctica. Here you can see they did a dugout tunnel to make a sleep area so that you're out of the elements. That's another image of the interior of that trench that you just saw. Here's Mount Erebus, a very active volcano. It's within view of McMurdo Station. Some more wonderful sights. Ice caves galore. They have what they call boondoggles. Basically, you know, you get a day off from your job and you get to go out and see the area. Lots of times it's under the pretense of helping some science folk that just need some extra hands carrying gear. These are the pressure ridges. The glaciers in Antarctica are extremely active. You can go to the pressure ridges every single day and it'll look different from the day you were there before. That flag that you see pumped into the side of the wall there, you can see how much it moved from its vertical position. The land is in motion. The South Pole Station, effectively where we were at, the position moves 33 feet a year. So you're effectively riding a glacier. When they put the marker in, every year it moves over 33 feet by surveyors. This is Scott's hut. So this is where Robert Scott basically had his outpost, and it is sitting in the exact same preserved situation as when he left. You can see on the bottom right-hand corner, there's actually a penguin just laying on the table in mint condition still from when it was left, you know, damn near 100 years ago at this point. The coldness and the dryness of the environment is like the ultimate preservative. Everything's just freeze-dried instantly. And here's some more penguins. Again, they're not acclimated. They approach people all the time because they're very curious animals. Weddell seals are also, this is all on the coast. This is just insight to as you approach the South Pole Station. There's the icebreakers coming in. We actually had an interesting event that occurred during my season. The Russian icebreaker that was contracted to do all the work for us that year apparently got a better contract, so they just left. And we were all joking around because, you know, there was a big hubbub about what are we going to do to break the ice, and as crew, we were all joking, and it was like, well, you guys are Raytheon. Yeah, just launch some missiles into the ice if you need to. Here's some shots of some of the open water and McMurdo Station on the bottom right. You can see where the water breaches and they can bring the cargo in. Penguins all over the place on the coast. The orange building on the left is what we would refer to as like a warm-up hut. So if you're out and about and you're doing work and it's, you know, you're going to be remote for the day, oftentimes they'll just drag out a warm-up hut for you so that you can stop freezing to death. Here's some of the science folk. Again, this is what Antarctica is presented as. All kinds of science going on, and that's why our taxpayer dollars are heartily invested. Tagging some seals. There's a cute guy. And they wrestle them. We would jokingly call them seal wrestlers, so they have to kind of just jump on them and do their tagging mission. Here's some science stuff going on again. Weather balloons all over the place. All kinds of stuff that they put up into the air. It's a lot of challenging work, actually. Some of these balloons, they've had disastrous events occur where things just broke and billions of dollars were wasted in the blink of an eye. Ah, the LC-130 plane. I love this plane. I was actually blessed when we were leaving McMurdo Station to go down to South Pole. I was fortunate enough to get into the jump seat and do the flight from the cockpit. So that was one of the coolest experiences of my life. The view flying from McMurdo down to the South Pole Station is just beyond words. Flying over the Transantarctic Mountains, getting to see what the glaciers look like. It very much looks like you can see the flow. Like it almost looks like as you're moving in the plane that you can like see the flow of the glacier even though it's stagnant technically. But this image here, we are now at South Pole Station. The top left corner, that is what is referred to as the elevated station. In my tour at the South Pole, we basically commissioned that station from the construction phase into operations and maintenance, as well as the ice cube neutrino detector, which I will be speaking about in depth at the end of this, was also commissioned from construction to operations and maintenance, effectively putting these facilities into their function for the first time ever. On the bottom right-hand corner, you can see kind of a good overview of the lay of the land of the facility, with the elevated station being on the front end of that photograph, and the back end are what are called Jamesways, which are these insulated tents that were leftovers from the Korean War. The way that we did tracking of direction there is we used the front end, the windward side of the elevated station, and that was considered grid north. And then everything else just slammed down on a grid, like somebody else was saying in one of the presentations. Americans love grid maps. 49 of us were stuck for the winter, and at the time, fewer than 200 women had wintered at the South Pole out of the fewer than 2,000 people in total. On the bottom right is what we just refer to as the scroll. It's computer monitors in the galley displayed the current conditions at pole, so anyone going outside knew how to prepare for the conditions, and the photos were just added for entertainment, morale-boosting stuff. People could upload their pictures and have a grand old time. If you look at that scroll, it gives you an indication of the information that we were using to assess outside travels. And you can see the temperature that day was minus 69.7 degrees ambient with a wind of 13.9. I'm trying to see. Oh, yeah, the wind chill temperature, minus 109.7. We laughed at the wind chill because it's a made-up number. If you've never been at minus 69, if you've never been at minus 90, it's laughable when folks are talking about, well, it's minus 20, but it feels like minus 60. And it's like, have you ever been in minus 60? You know, so it was a big joke. But the barometer was actually the most important number for us. You can see there that it's at what we would call 10.3. That wasn't a bad number. That meant you can go out and about and walk around and not really kill yourself. Because of the altitude being 9,300 feet actual elevation, but because of the atmospheric conditions, they would give it as a physio altitude, and sometimes that number would get up to 11.3, and that's when you knew you were going to have a really hard day. It would be very taxing to accomplish anything, and you'd have to pause a lot in just what you would consider normal work. You get extremely winded when it's 11.3. This is inside the South Pole Station. We had a weight room, we had a lounge, we had a gym that we would turn into a movie theater, and then that's our comm center to be able to connect to the outside world. Just as a little sidebar, it's a tradition at the South Pole Station. When the last plane flies out, we convert the gym into the movie theater, and we watch the movie The Thing. And then we all joke around about it, how it's time to get the flamethrowers ready. This is the Plumbers Jamesway. So I am a member of the International Plumbers and Pipe Fitters of the South Pole Station, and if you look on the bottom of the sign, you can see my signature. So it's a feather in my cap to have been able to sling my tools in such conditions. We did have a greenhouse, and we had I would say, a nominal amount of produce that came out of it. And because there was a lot of science folks around, we would do calculations on things like, what did it cost the taxpayers to get the strawberry onto our plate? And the math on that was, it was $60 a strawberry. Oh, I just want to back up a second. On the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that there's a library. Now, it doesn't show in this picture, but basically the angle that the photographer is taking the photo from would be from, there's a locked bookcase at the South Pole Station that you could simply go to HR, ask for the key, open up the bookcase, and read any book you want. There's a lot of books in there that's the only place on the planet that the book exists. A lot of journals from expeditions and people that made it to the South Pole. Also, some books that I became very interested in was from 1957 to 1994. In that bookcase, they had what they called the Psychological Evaluations and Winter Over Studies. So they were absolutely experimenting on us and taking results. And apparently they just stopped putting the books in the case in 1994. But because I was reading them, I became cognizant that every chapter was still occurring as dictated according to the books. On the top right, you'll see the power plant. Basically, we had 2 cat generators that provided the vast majority of our power, and in the back end of that room, there was a smaller unit that we called the peaker. Typically, there would be 1 generator running at a time, while the other large one was getting serviced, and then if need be for load, the peaker would kick on to cover up the discrepancy. In the bottom left, that's our galley. That was more or less our rec area where people communicated, engaged, and intermingled during the winter. Jamesways. On the left-hand corner, that's the interior space of where we stayed for the summer season. And it was a funny story. We had a gal that was in charge of the National Science Foundation's energy consumption at the South Pole Station, and she was giving a seminar one day in the galley, and she asked everyone, raise your hand if you know what the least efficient building is here at the South Pole Station. And I raised my hand immediately, and she says, you there? And I said, Jamesway 8. She goes, you're right. She goes, how did you know that? I said, because I live in it. It's you just keep wasting fuel oil because the place never gets warm. Top right corner. That is a picture of a morale-boosting event. That room belonged to the leader of the the National Science Foundation representative for Antarctica. That room was off limits to everyone. Nobody ever gets it issued to them except for the NSF director. Well, during the winter season, that wing was closed down. So since morale was dwindling, we decided to turn it into a speakeasy, and it was called Tequila Sunrise. So when people were getting stressed out, we would just say, Tequila Sunrise has opened up this weekend. You know the special knock? This is Robert Schwartz, and I believe this is supposed to play. It was supposed to give an animation of him getting geared up to go outside. I'm not sure. Yeah, not the end of the world. But this gentleman here holds the record for most ice time at the South Pole Station. This man did 15 winters. It's close to 15 years' time. He might get a couple of months off a year off ice. Very smart guy. Uh-oh. I got it. Here's a depiction of somebody geared up to go outside. Icing up was actually welcomed because ice is 32 degrees. It's a lot warmer than minus 60. That's me, dressed for outside. And by having the mask on my face, I could tell it was transitioning season. As it started to get colder outside, you'd be amazed at how much your eyes off-gas moisture. So it would just start to freeze the interior of the mask. So as we were approaching the winter season, the masks just became completely useless. The picture on the right is a shot. I got some frostbite, which just happens regularly there. Oftentimes, you can see on the left-hand picture, through the winter season, it got up to the point where I basically had 17 pieces of headgear that I would layer on top of each other. And sometimes you'd nail it and be perfectly covered. Other times there'd be a gap, and next thing you know, you walk inside and your face is frostbit. The picture on the left is the actual position, geographic South Pole. That brass globe that you see there is 90 degrees south on this planet, the pivot point. The picture on the right is what we call Destination Alpha. That's on the skiway side of the facility, so when people arrive in the Hercs, that's the first thing that they see. There's someone taking their hero shot at the South Pole. Sometimes folks from McMurdo get to do a boondoggle as far south as the South Pole, and the first thing they want to do is get their hero shot, like their Admundsen himself. On the right-hand side, you see a twin otter, which is basically the workhorse of the Antarctic program. They are very, very strong planes, and the pilots that go in those all over the ice are nothing short of maniacs. They can do anything with that plane. Oh, there's actually 3 poles at the South Pole. There's the geographic pole, the ceremonial pole, and the magnetic pole. The magnetic pole is actually off the coast of Antarctica. The geographic pole is the one that the person's doing the hero shot at, and then the ceremonial pole is the one on the side there that has all the flags, and that one's just basically for photo ops for rich people that fly in, or dignitaries like John Kerry. Antarctica is a great place to study the air and the universe. The air at the South Pole is possibly the cleanest air in the world. Since 1957, NOAA has been recording data on air quality and weather by taking samples daily for ozone, carbon dioxide, and other trace elements. They're paying special attention to the halocarbons which affect the ozone. Again, this is the science that they're telling us is worthy of said investment. The South Pole Station inhabits the land area where polar night lasts the longest. The sun goes down in March and does not rise again until September. During this time, the telescopes have a clear view of the universe. The location of the South Pole, combined with extremely dry, thin, clear air, low temperatures, and minimal background radiation, makes it a great observatory for astronomy, astrophysics, and related disciplines. Now, I can appreciate that the skies here get clear and you guys see some stars, but I cannot begin to tell you what the sky looks like at the South Pole Station in the wintertime on a clear night. It's better than any picture that you've ever seen in a book. The nebulas, the clusters, the clouds of stars are just beyond description. There were many times that I'd be walking outside and you just have to stop, lay down on the ice and just soak it in because, when are you going to get a chance to do that, I often say my eyes are blessed. These are pictures of what we would call the dark sector. Dark meaning it was radio silence because the gear could interfere with the work that they were doing, and we were predicated to basically only transmit our LMR radios in that area if it was a dire emergency. The top left corner and the top right corner our SPT, the South Pole Telescope. When we were there, my crew facilitated a repair that had never ever been done in the history of the world. The bearings needed to be replaced on that telescope, and normally in the rest of the world they would just tear that thing from the top down to the bearings, replace the bearings, and then rebuild it. Since the windows for construction at the South Pole are so small, we came up with a different plan and basically figured out how to jack up the 450,000 pounds of steel on the top end, pull the bearing out, and then drop it back down on the new bearing. The South Pole Telescope was being built to try to answer big questions about the universe as a whole rather than questions about the stars, galaxies, and other objects that make up the universe. In particular, they hope to answer how old is the universe, what kind of things are in the universe, and how has the universe changed as it's aged. Can we understand or make models that describe how the universe as a whole works, and can we say anything about how the universe will look in the future? I got to go into these buildings every single day, and one of the things that I learned that the South Pole Telescope was scanning for every day was looking for suns, specifically solar systems. They were finding them at a rate they almost could not count them that fast. As everybody in this here room probably understands, the universe, the multiverse, the cosmos is way bigger than we've considered, and these guys are adding it up almost at a pace that's incalculable. The absence of water vapor and generally thin atmosphere are particularly important for observing radiation at minuscule sub-millimeter wavelengths. Water vapor can absorb microwave signals that come in, producing confusing and incomplete results. The air pressure is also low because of the altitude, which greatly reduces noise from the atmosphere. Admonson Scott has perfect access to what is known as the Southern Hole, a patch of unusually clean sky that allows for optimal viewing into very deep space and consequently to the very early universe. That altitude, so I guess as a reference, like, you can see how flat it is here, but imagine if you took away all of the mountains entirely, so there was just complete flatness. The benefit of your eyes there is that you could just simply stand anywhere you want, raise your eyes a few degrees, and at that point, the whole world drops out of your view. And at that point, you can turn and look, and you are the telescope, effectively. It's no different than being in space. The balloon inflation facility. 2 balloons a day were launched for weather sampling, and also on the bottom left, on the left-hand corner, that white system there was our air supply system for our SCBAs for the firefighting team, for which I happened to be a plumber at the South Pole Station and a lead on the fire brigade. So we had a limited amount of SCBA bottles, so the split second we went into real activity, which happened often, we also had to start getting the air tanks refilled. That's a shot of the balloon inflation facility with the one of the 2 balloons being released for the day. Here's where we're getting to the good stuff. This is the IceCube South Pole Neutrino Observatory. I'm going to go into great detail on what they tell you it is, because then I'm going to tell you what it really is. IceCube is the world's largest neutrino detector. IceCube is comprised of 5,160 digital optical modules, we'll call them DOMs from this point out, suspended along 86 strings, or steel cables effectively, embedded in a cubic kilometer of ice beneath the South Pole. It detects neutrinos through the tiny flashes of blue light called Cherenkov light, or radiation, produced when neutrinos interact in the ice. There are 275 physicists in 12 countries and 48 institutions collaborating on this science. Just for clarification, this facility is run by the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They are the academic arm that's supposed to be in charge of this system. The colored dots illustrate the pattern of holes and season in which the holes were drilled in the ice for the placement of the neutrino detectors. And I want to point out that there was a very interesting image that was presented by Dr. Hine in his presentation in one of the slides where you were showing some of the specialty shapes of things. And I want people to pay attention to the pattern because what I noticed was that that image appeared just like a bird's eye view looking down on the detector array. What a coincidence. Sacred geometry matters. A dedicated team of over 300 ice cube drillers, technicians, and scientists contributed at the South Pole to ice cube construction between December of 2004 and December of 2010, drilling 2,450 meters into the Antarctic glacier took on average 48 hours, while deployment of the sensors lasted about 11 hours. The sensors, called DOMs, had to be quickly installed before the ice completely froze around them. Make special note of what was just said there. It's actually very easy to drill ice. What a coincidence. We're often told that things are not possible like that down in Antarctica. It takes too much time, it's too long. It's just wholly not true. The way that they drill through the ice right here is just simply by adding heat. The ice itself is typically at around minus 60 degrees. So all you have to do is add warmth, and the ice is actually, because of the 0% humidity, it's the least dense ice that you can have at the surface. So as you apply the heat, it actually retracts and creates a large volume of space very rapidly until you get down to some of the more dense stuff at the bottom. But again, you add heat, it dissipates. So the fern drill and the hot water drill heads. The fern drill was used to drill through the upper layer of compacted snow or fern down to where the ice actually begins, which is about 50 meters below the surface. The solid ice was melted using a straight, high-pressure stream of hot water from the specifically designed enhanced hot water drill. These are the DOMs. They're about the size of a basketball. There's 5,160 of them. They have names and identifiers, so some of them are called, C-3PO, Chewbacca. Basically, the scientists and folks are allowed to just write a name on it, and then they would register it as that. The picture on the right is actually a DOM that is just inside the door of the entry of DA that I mentioned before, Destination Alpha, on display for everybody to see. This is a great depiction of the scale of what is embedded in the ice. So you can see on the bottom there is an illustration that shows the Eiffel Tower and its relative proportion to this system. This is the world's largest phased array transmitter. This overview you can see on the top was very similar to Dr. Hines' depiction. I believe the hexagon matters a lot in this. Here's some of the cubers. Setting up the cabling that goes from each of the holes down. This has been the topic of a lot of discussion, this picture, because a lot of folks in, I guess you would say, the electrical components community have confirmed that, if this is just simply a passive device, then that cable is very large and looks more like a power supply. And we'll be getting to the power output of the ice cube neutrino detector shortly. But once the sensors were deployed, the cables were pulled to the ice cube lab to connect the sensors to the servers in the lab. The ice cube lab hosts the computers collecting raw data from the detector. And you could see in the other pictures the amount of wiring and processing information. I would say that the ice cube lab processing room might have been double the size of this tent, with just rows and rows and rows of server towers. The computational power of what was going on in there is also heavily in question. This is a depiction of what they would call the bloom. So when a neutrino basically impacts the nucleus of a water molecule in the ice, a reaction occurs which sheds off the Cherenkov radiation. The neutrino and the nucleus of the water atom are destroyed, and a muon is released. But effectively, the DOMs are reacting to the blue light. So here you'll see the red area would be the highest concentration of reaction from the DOMs, and then the other DOMs would light relative to their distance. And then at that point, they could triangulate the direction from which the neutrino came. IceCube searches for neutrinos from the most violent astrophysical sources, events like exploding stars, gamma-ray bursts, and cataclysmic phenomena, including black holes and neutron stars. So they say. The Ice Cube telescope is a powerful tool to search for dark matter and could reveal the physical processes associated with the enigmatic origin of the highest energy particles in nature. 6 years after its completion, Ice Cube has isolated more than 80 high-energy cosmic neutrinos with energies between 100 TeV and 10 PeV from more than 1 million atmospheric neutrinos and hundreds of billions of cosmic ray muons. For those of you that may not know, neutrinos currently seem to be the most prevalent particle in all of our understanding of everything. There are technically billions and trillions of them passing through this space that we're in right now. They're actually just so small that they can pass in between the, I guess you'd call it the electron shell and the nucleus of every atom. There's just almost never any contact because they're that small. This is the South Pole Traverse. Basically, the United States Antarctic program spends a lot of money flying in fuel by Hercs. If I remember correctly, they can only carry about 35,000 gallons of fuel to pass off. So they're working on a program when I was there that was exploring the possibility of just dragging fuel bladders across the surface. And since then, it has become highly effective, and they have moved in that direction to more appropriately move the fuel. Here's a trial run for a C-17 airdrop during the summer season, and we have photographs of this because it's viewable. During my winter season, it was great that they actually did this trial run because we had 2 emergency airdrops for medical reasons, and I can assure you that that was a nightmare to fire up these planes that were nowhere near our proximity and get them to drop stuff off. We basically set up some burn drums so that they had a target to aim for, and it was very unnerving as we knew the airdrop was occurring because we had no idea how accurate it was going to be, and we were kind of just waiting for stuff to come through the roof. Every winter over had to volunteer for an emergency team. We had 4 emergency response teams. Team 1 was what we would just basically call first responders, and they would move immediately to wherever the alarm system dictated what the problem was. They would gather information to transfer to Team 2, which was the fire brigade, which was my team. I was a lead on the fire brigade, and basically we would start gearing up, waiting to get intel from the Team 1 crew to let us know, what gear we're going to need. On the bottom left, we have Team 3, which was the medical team, and we also had Team 4, which was just straight up logistics. During our winter season, we actually had our crew perform an appendectomy on one of our crew members, and boy, was that quite the day. We had 1 doctor officially, but you can see there's plenty of other personnel in that room. So there's other people that were simply on their day-to-day operations, were a work order scheduler, a grub lugger, a scientist by definition, but on that day, they were a surgical team. These are some of the Aurora Australis, and although these pictures do look fantastic, I can assure you it looks so much better to the eye, and what the photographs will never be able to give you is the sound. They actually are very audible. I called it sizzling, and you could actually hear the sizzling as an indication even before the aurora would show up. And it was like, I don't know how to put it. I felt like it was Mother Nature talking to me, almost like, here I come. Like the sizzling would start, and you'd be like, oh, here it comes, And they would also follow you, which I think I've heard the native Alaskans say such things up in the northern areas where I work, and I can attest to that. It was like the aurora was following you sometimes. The South Pole has 1 night and 1 day for 6 months each. When we stay the winter, we call it spending the night. So in the program, I get to tell folks I spent a whole day at the South Pole. And it is actually very challenging to get used to the sun. I used to joke around and say you basically need a welding helmet to go outside. For, I guess, a reference, normally when you look up at the sky and you see the sun, it's this round plasma ball, but it's this circle of brightness. At the South Pole, because of the crystal conditions in the air, imagine if you were to just take that same stuff of brightness, but it's no longer just a circle. It actually comes straight down as a bar to the horizon and then across the ice from the horizon right to your feet. So it's that much more exponential brightness just stacked upon itself. And when you would be turning and doing work and you would be going in that direction, I mean, it was wholly painful. I think my eyes are actually heartily negatively impacted. You will very rarely see me outside without sunglasses on, and in hindsight, I can assure you that Raytheon Polar Services was not giving us the right PPE. This was our sunrise dinner. So the end of the night that we spent there, the culinary crew was, tasked with giving us a sunrise feast. And it was amazing for us because we had sun again. And then prior to this event, they had actually sent out forms to the whole crew. What do you suggest that we have for the sunrise dinner? And everybody filled out their stuff and handed it in and, hoped, And then it turned out when we all sat down, they just made everybody exactly what they asked for. So it was actually really cool. Everybody, it was a big deal for us. That's my picture there. I had the bacon-wrapped fillet with coconut shrimp. It was amazing. This is the first flight out. So that's oh geez, why can't I think of the name of that plane right now? Anyone? I know it was I think it was a DC-9, but they hot rodded them for the Antarctic situation, and also a very stout plane. And that brings us to the credits on that, and I'm going to back us up now to the most important part of this conversation. The ice cube neutrino detector. As I stated earlier in this program, they call it a science facility. I found that in the owner's manual, basically, the operator's manual, right? Everybody buys something, it comes in an operator's manual, whether it's a car, a tractor, a television. In the detector's paperwork, I found a page that states very clearly that each of the 5,160 DOMs actually has the capacity to transmit at up to 2,047 volts each. That, ladies and gentlemen, makes it the world's largest phased array transmitter. This thing is not simply listening. So, I did do a lot of research. I did speak to the former crew hands that were there with me. The reason that we started engaging in conversations years after being there, oof, this is rough, is everybody is now suffering from Havana syndrome-like symptoms. People were reaching out because they were in bad shape medically, and they wanted to know what my condition was. So since I became cognizant that they had yet to put all their cards on the table and were asking me to put all my cards on the table, and I was thoroughly convinced that at my time that I was there that these folks were spooks because I had time in the submarine service and I'm familiar with spook activity. As supporting information to spook activity, part of what I had to do every day was go through the entirety of all of the buildings, all of the outbuildings. We had a communications room and communications operators. It was my job to go in there every day, check the lights, check the fire sprinkler system, but because I wasn't a knucklehead, I made sure to randomize that visit every single day. I would charge in that door unannounced with great silence and watch as they freaked out and started closing things down, amping up their respiratory rates. What are you doing here? What are you doing? I'm doing my job. What are you doing? How come every time I walk in this room, you guys start shutting everything down? And everybody would just shut up. But long story short, post visit to Antarctica and having to converse with these folks about what was going on now, they put all their cards on the table. And I told them that, I'm learning things and, we need to get to the bottom of this. And then it was at that point that I was basically read into the activity of what was really going on. And this is a directed energy weapon system. It can generate earthquakes. In February of 2011, when this system went from construction to operations and maintenance, effectively, the first time they ever transmitted, we caused the earthquakes in Christchurch, New Zealand in February of 2011, 2 of them. I was initially told that this was friendly fire, and I did believe that for a little bit. until I continued in my research and found stuff that shockingly leads me to believe that it absolutely was not an accident. And the piece of information that I came across in that regards was a WikiLeaks post, apparently from the desk of Hillary Clinton. And I'm paraphrasing because I'm horrible with remembering things verbatim, but it basically said that she was very happy about the results of the earthquakes in Christchurch and very happy that they occurred on cue. So this corroborates what I was hearing from my own crew hands, that we have the capacity to do these things. It doesn't take a lot of research. If you simply want to go on the internet and look at all of the science that is available, you can look up how to induce earthquakes. This was also very fortuitous that Dr. Simon brought up yesterday. We had a slight engagement on the topic of ball lightning being generated by earthquakes, and that symmetry would tolerate the idea that if you could generate ball lightning and deliver it somewhere, well, in its explosive capacity, it's simply a discharge of energy. A simple required straw that breaks the proverbial back of the camel and can instigate an earthquake, certainly with great ease, wherever there is a fault line. Since I've gone into the disclosure realm, I am still supported by crew hands that worked on these systems and want this information out because justice is required. Humanity deserves the truth. They want to impress upon everybody that it is extremely easy to generate an earthquake. We just need to understand that the technology exists and is being wielded. Energy discharges are energy discharges. It's just that simple. If it turns out that we have systems that have the capacity to deliver them, we have new weapons of war. And this is what I'm trying to let everybody know, is I've simply found the location of one of these systems. And everybody should start understanding that the world is not what we think. This is one of 3 directed energy weapon systems that I discovered and shared publicly in Washington, D.C. This system, in my conversations with Dr. Greer and the wonderful team that he has, appears to also have the capacity for faster than light communications through quantum entanglement. I don't know if anybody's heard years ago of Gary McKinnon, who was a whistleblower who hacked into NASA. And he provided a spreadsheet list of what were the titles of an off-world fleet, each of the ship's titles, and their respective captains. I would simply suggest that if we do, in fact, have a fleet out there, which it seems we do, we would, of course, need a means of communication. This system would be one of them. So, third issue with this system, in the grand scheme of what we're learning in referenceable, patented science that exists, is the very nefarious activity of what is now being referred to as voice-to-skull, which is one of the symptoms on the Havana syndrome list that they benignly refer to as victims hearing peculiar sounds in their heads. What they're alluding to, without saying with any great specificity, is the ability to put a voice in your head. This was used during Desert Storm very effectively, and this is a technology that is wholly referenceable and real. And I believe that this system is just one of the more powerful units that can accomplish it. When it comes to directed energy weapons, we need to think of weapons differently than we have conventionally. We're used to, a rifle where you pull the trigger and one caliber of bullet comes out per trigger pull, and it's very conventional. Directed energy weapons are very manifold. They can do multiple things because once we step into the energy realm, it kind of almost gets into like whatever you can think of, and then it's just a matter of changing a couple of circuits and a couple of things, and then that makes the unit itself multifaceted. And then we have the complex problem is that these systems seem to be also cogged together to almost make a bigger, more nefarious machine. If we have this system over here at the South Pole Station, if we have another system in Gacona, Alaska, and if we take, for all practical purposes, a beam from one and a beam from other, and then we cross them, we start to get these more compounded, complex problems for humanity. The other system that I came across in the directed energy weapons category, I was working one day. I had to swap out a pump. That pump had electricity going to it. I had to isolate that circuit to facilitate the pump replacement. And when I was tracking the power back to the panel, I became confused because the panel, its marking said this is supposed to be off, this is supposed to be on, but nothing was matching up. So I was concerned, am I getting the right circuit here? Am I going to de-energize correctly? So I ran it up my chain of command, had a conversation with the facilities engineer. He came down, started looking at stuff, and then the circuit that was causing the confusion, I was then at that time informed that that goes to the ELF system, which we were told was de-energized. And now I learned it was on. Well, again, I was in the submarine service. I'm very aware that ELF is a highly guarded system. It can certainly be used for submarine communications, and I do not doubt that our spooks were communicating with submarines regularly. I don't doubt that. But again, upon further research, we find that these systems are more complex, and then again, when you cog them together with other systems, great feats of technological advancement can occur, and now that's 2 directed energy weapon systems that I testified in Congress for having discovered at the South Pole. The third one was what we call the Atmospheric Research Observatory, the one that they were talking about, the clean air studies. I witnessed myself on many an occasion when I would be doing my rounds in the pitch black darkness of a winter at South Pole. There was an extremely large green laser that shot out of the roof of the Atmospheric Research Observatory. It was a sustained burst for minutes on end. It does not take a lot of research for anybody in this room to find that that is very challenging to accomplish. My research has shown that green lasers are the most challenging and require the most power to simply fire for a millisecond. And I was watching sustained bursts for minutes on end. There is some sort of alternative power source, apparently, at the South Pole Station than those 2 cat generators I showed you beforehand. This is also what I showed in Washington, D.C., were maps that I had which appear that Old Pole, which was supposedly blown up during my summer season, I think was a cover story to stop the winter over activities that were going on annually that were folks accessing Old Pole. In the boredom of wintertime at South Pole, it became very common for the polies to just break into Old Pole, go under the ice and see what they can find, and I think they were trying to blow it up as a cover story. There's a very long tunnel that is on one side of the Old Pole. I believe that at the very least, since Old Pole predated the Antarctic Treaty, which put the limit at that date for having a nuclear power supply, McMurdo Station had a PM8 reactor at it before, and it's a very small modular system that can be flown around by Hercs. I believe that there was a system just like that at South Pole Station and may still be up and running and be the actual power supply for these 3 directed energy weapon systems that would take god-awful amounts of power. The other list of possibilities for the power source, believe it or not, this one's very interesting and comes to me through John Warner IV, who was the son of John Warner III, who was former Republican senator of the state of Virginia, and John Warner III was also formerly the Secretary of the Navy. John the son reached out to me early when I first came out disclosing information because he saw value to what I was discussing at the South Pole. And he wanted to express to me information that his father had passed on to him. He was John, the son, was very interested in Antarctic activities. And he asked his father, he says, it seems like, the Navy's always still involved in Antarctica. What's going on down there? And his father informed him that there was submarine activity below the ice, that they were tunneling to get underneath. A lot of people don't realize that the actual land continent of Antarctica, the vast majority of it's below sea level. There's just so much ice accumulation that it's effectively bedded down to the land that's below sea level. So a submarine coming in through the ocean could bore into the ice, be above the land and below the waterline still. So you absolutely could go through there. Also, the science community has recently just disclosed publicly that you have to realize that the continent of Antarctica has the same amount of massive waterways as any other continent. So the riverways could be under the ice, and just like we saw with the drilling of the ice for the neutrino detector boreholes, that water coming through would just bore out and make space that certainly could be traversed by submarines, which it seems the Nazis were saying way back when. When John asked his father why this submarine activity was so prevalent in Antarctica, his father's answer was space operations. That's a big deal. Goes back to that whole faster-than-light communications. We have stuff off-planet. I want to back up. There's something I forgot to mention about the neutrino detector. Again, in communication with folks and doing research about what's going on, it appears these UFOs, whether man-made or off-world, in-world, whatever you want to call it, the exotic propulsion systems that make them move around apparently emit neutrinos. So, having a neutrino detector at the South Pole Station that's omnidirectional, so it doesn't care which direction anything's coming from, and neutrinos do not let anything block their activity. This makes this a very wonderful air traffic control center for any exotically propelled vehicle coming in or about our planet or atmosphere. There's a lesser known gentleman in the entire Antarctic and or UFO community conversation, and his name is Lloyd Berkner. Lloyd Berkner was part of the original Bird expeditions as both a radioman and a pilot. He was some sort of anomalous brain when it came to radios, and he had a major understanding way ahead of the curve of how to set these things up. After Berkner's experience with the Antarctic program, he went to the United States government and was looking to start a program that was set up to start paying attention. And this is way back when. He wanted to set up an observation system for things coming on and off the planet, was how he put it. What the heck did he see down there that made him want this seed money? Well, it turns out that the US government agreed with him, and they gave him the monies that would start this program. But they didn't start the program under the pretense for which he presented it. They gave us what was called IGY, International Geophysical Year. It's a very peculiar term that doesn't make much sense to anybody, myself included, and I worked under this umbrella title. IGY is the title of the scientific arm of all activities going on in Antarctica through all international science communities. But nobody seems to discuss what fostered it. We now operate under all this false pretense science, while all the nefarious activities that requested the money and got it approved are happening in secret. So besides the fact that this is 3 directed energy weapons systems that I found, it appears that it has a lot to do with UFO activity, whether it is our stuff or anything foreign. Back to the laser. When I went and testified in June of 2023, I had just kind of at that point deciphered the third system and presented it to both committees in DC. My birthday was only a few days after I had given this testimony, and it was amazing. The National Science Foundation has a website, of course. They can post anything they want on that website. On my birthday, apparently I still have friends in the program, on my birthday, for the first time ever, they posted a picture of the laser beam coming out of the building and firing into the sky. Somebody had sent that link to me. I almost fell out of my chair, because that right there was the program supporting what I just accused them of. So I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a wonderful birthday present, and yeah, it was great to see. But this is basically the state of the union of the world right now. When I went to testify and I was done testifying, the conversation rapidly changed to, what do we do now that we, the people in that room, are cognizant of there being a massive amount of rogue agencies that have access to technology that most of the human population is unbeknownst of. And nobody seems to have an answer. That's the really scary thing, is that nobody seems to know who is actually in charge of this equipment down at the South Pole. Nobody seems to know who's dictating where to shoot the next earthquake at, what the laser beam is firing at, who's gathering the information and shipping it out every single day, and where is it going. Things have gotten out of control of the oversight of Congress and thus the oversight of the American people. We need to start considering things differently. Mark Twain once said that it's a sign of higher intellect to consider an idea that you don't yet support. I'm asking everybody in this room to start considering, what do we do now that we know that these technologies have been in use for probably the greater part of the last 4 decades? What do we do as people, and making it better for our children that we're leaving this planet to, knowing that there are rogue agencies with Star Wars-like technology doing whatever they want, because if this information isn't known to the public, it's not regulated. You know, people often say, well, what are they doing with it? They're doing with it whatever they want until we reel them in. It's a very scary thing right now, but if you start to pay attention, if you look up the Havana symptoms list, and you start to pay attention to the people that you know, your own loved ones, it's very terrifying, but you're going to start to realize we're all actually suffering these symptoms. I know this because I'm familiar with it. I've been exposed to it since 2010. I know people that I have witnessed the changes. It's terrifying, but that's because I'm paying attention and I'm informed. If you actually start to pay attention to this stuff and you start realizing that we're all in the crossfire, the world is in not a good shape right now. I mean, obviously, we have wonderful politicians looking out for our best interests, right? You know, so I don't think that these people care about us at all. I don't think they want to release this very high-end technology because they're monopolizing it. It's highly lucrative. I mean, if you had a spaceship, you know, imagine how fast you could transport your product to market and what that would save you. You know, imagine if you had a spaceship and you could go out into the cosmos and you could go mine stuff that other people have to work way harder for. We have a fleet out there. Gary McKinnon told us. We have communications abilities with that fleet. We have a means to keep other people from paying attention to it. So it's a whole other way to consider the function of the world, and I'm just strongly suggesting, for the benefit of posterity, we start putting our brains in a different direction of consideration, because I hate to tell you, things are a lot worse than we've ever thought. And that's basically what I'm here to share with you folks. I am completely open to any questions that you have, because I can appreciate this is a lot to throw at you, but it's just the current state of the union.